Boston Tea Party. The 1770 Parliament repealed all the taxes in the Townshend Act, except the tax on tea. Then in 1773, Parliament passed the Tea Act. This act did not raise taxes, but it did try to get the colonists to buy tea from only one British company. Again, the colonists protested Parliament's continued attempts to control them. Colonial leaders declared that ships bringing British tea to the colonies would not be allowed to unload. On December 16, 1773, colonists dressed as the Mohawk Indians took over British ships in Boston Harbor and dumped all the tea into the water. This event became known as the Boston Tea Party. Britain punishes Boston. In 1774, Parliament passed the Coercive Acts as punishment for the Boston Tea Party. Some colonists called them the Intolerable Acts because they were so severe. The act closed the port of Boston until the colonists paid for the tea they had dumped. They sent even more British soldiers to Boston and forced colonists to house and feed them. Also, the entire colony of Massachusetts was put under the control of a British general. The Coercive Acts angered many colonists, but also made them more united. Other colonies began sending food supplies, and money to Boston. Colonial leaders voted to stop all trade with Britain and to create volunteer armies. The fighting began. In April 1775, colonists learned of the secret British plans to destroy weapons that colonists had stored in the towns of Lexington and Concord, Massachusetts. On the night of April 18th, colonists Paul Revere and William Dawes rode out from Boston to warn the towns that British troops were coming. The men were stopped after they reached Lexington, but another writer, Dr. Samuel Prescott, rode on to warn colonists in Concord. The warnings worked. When British troops arrived in Lexington the next morning, a small group of colonists gathered to fight them. The British quickly defeated the colonists. However, when the British arrived in Concord, they were met by a larger group of colonists. These colonists fought well and forced the British back to Boston. The colonists continued to fire at the British along the way and caused heavy losses. No one knows who fired the first shot at these battles, but people later called it the shot heard round the world. From that point on, there would be no turning back. The American colonies had started the fight for independence. Unit 5, Lesson 2. How did the colonists work together? Set the scene. Have you ever worked in a group or as part of a team? People who work together as a group are often more effective than one person who works alone. The American colonists realized they had to work together in order to cause change. What groups did they form in their move toward freedom? Preview the lesson vocabulary. Delegate, noun, a person chosen to represent. Committee, noun, an organized group that meets to make decisions. Correspond, verb, to communicate by writing letters. Unify, verb, to come together or unite. Militia, noun, a civilian army that is used only in emergencies. Reading sequence. When you read history, dates can often help you follow the sequence of events. As you read the lesson, circle the dates to help you follow the sequence of events that brought the colonists together in the cause of independence. The colonies decide to meet. For the most part, the 13 British colonies were independent of one another and felt little reason to meet. However, in 1754, the need for representatives of the colonies to meet together finally came. As the French and Indian War approached, Britain wanted to improve relations with the Iroquois. Why? Britain hoped to gain the Iroquois as allies if war broke out. To achieve this goal, delegates from 7 colonies and from the Iroquois Confederacy met in Albany, New York. A delegate is a person chosen to represent others. The Albany Congress, as it was called, helped the colonists realize how important it was for them to work together. Question 1. What events led to the Albany Congress? Pause. The correct answer is the events that led to the Albany Congress were the 1754 need for representatives of the colony to meet in order to gain the Iroquois Confederacy as allies in the French and Indian War. Britain wanted to improve relations with the Iroquois in hopes that if a battle broke out between Britain and any other countries, that the Iroquois would then be allies and would fight on their side to help protect the colonists. Resuming the next section, the colonists come together. As you have learned, colonial delegates met again in 1765 to respond to the Stamp Act. Although the Congress was successful, conditions in the colonies did not improve over time. As a result, Samuel Adams and other colonial leaders started groups called Committees of Correspondence in 1772. A committee is an organized group that meets to make decisions. To correspond is to communicate by writing letters. Adams felt that the colonies needed to unify or unite. To do this, committees were formed throughout the colonies. Letters with news from each committee were carried from town to town by riders on horseback. In this way, leaders in each colony were made aware of what was going on in the other colonies. What was the purpose of the Committees of Correspondence? Pause to answer the question. The purpose of the Committees of Correspondence was to create a way for the colonies to unite. This way, they were able to carry news via letters from each colony, and each committee was, or the committee was represented by a colonist from each town. Moving on to part 3, the leaders meet in Philadelphia. Although the colonists convinced Britain to repeal some taxes, Parliament was still making decisions for the colonies. This made many colonists angry because the colonies had no representation in Parliament. In response to the Coercive Acts, colonial leaders decided it was time to meet. The First Continental Congress met in Philadelphia in 1774. Every colony but Georgia sent delegates. The delegates decided to stop trading with Britain until the Coercive Acts were repealed. Each colony also agreed to start training militias to protect itself. A militia is a civilian army that is used only in emergencies. Delegates agreed to meet again in 1 year if relations with Britain had not improved. Question 3. What were the results of the First Continental Congress? Pause to answer the question. The results of the First Continental Congress were the following 3 things. 1. The delegates decided to stop trading with Britain until the Coercive Acts were repealed. 2. Each colony also agreed to start training militias in order to help protect itself and the colonists. And 3. The delegates agreed that within a year, if relations had not improved between the colonies and Great Britain, that they would meet again. The final section. A final plea is made to the king. Relations with Britain did not improve, so the Second Continental Congress met in Philadelphia in May 1775. The battles of Lexington and Concord had been fought just a month earlier, and many important decisions needed to be made. The Congress formed a Continental Army and made a Virginia plantation owner and former British soldier named George Washington its commander. The Congress also made a final attempt to avoid war. They sent a letter called the Olive Branch Petition to King George. This petition said that the colonists were still loyal to Britain and that war could be avoided if the colonists were given more freedom to govern themselves. The king never answered. As he will soon learn, this Congress would finally decide that there was only one thing to do left: declare independence from Britain. Question 4. In the text, underline the actions taken by the Second Continental Congress. Pause the video to answer the question. The text evidence that shows the actions taken by the Second Continental Congress starts where it says, the Congress also made a final attempt to avoid war. They sent a letter to they sent a letter called the Olive Branch Petition to King George. This petition said the colonists were still loyal to Britain and war could be avoided if the colonies were given freedom to govern themselves. And another action that was taken was the Congress formed the Continental Army and made George Washington, who was a former British soldier and a Virginia plantation owner, its commander. This is the end of Social Studies, Unit 5, continuation of Lesson 1